The NFL picture gets a bit murkier after another strange week. We get into it on Beyond the Locker Room next. Well. We come to another closing of the NFL schedule, and it was another interesting week with some very interesting results, I would say. And once again, we'll break it down. I'll focus on three games I thought were interest to me, and thought how they play into the playoff picture. So we'll get into it with starting with I called the Rodgers Bowl. It was the Steelers versus the Packers in Pittsburgh. This game started off Pittsburgh. They were controlling the ball pretty well at first, but unfortunately they were only able to get a lot of threes instead of a lot of sevens, and that ended up costing them at the end. So just taking a look at it, Jordan Love went for 29 for 37 for 360 yards. He was able to move the ball a lot in the second half. They were down by 21 points in the fourth quarter and came back to kind of win 35-25. We're seeing a lot of this in the fourth quarter of games where teams are making the adjustments and just finding serious gouges and weaknesses in defenses. And the Steelers defense hasn't looked typical Steelers. Let's put it this way. That's something you always can rely on with Pittsburgh. Doesn't matter how good or how bad or who the coach is, the defense is usually kind of like something that keeps them in games throughout the years, especially through the Tomlin era. And this year, where they're getting some more competent quarterback play, for the most part, by Rodgers, now they find that the defense has right now been slacking. So it's got to be, it's a frustrating situation as a Steelers fan. But if you're the Packers, this was probably one of Jordan Love's best performances of the year so far. He kept calm, kept poised in a kind of a tough situation. Obviously playing against the quarterback that kind of brought him in. Kind of like he was the understudy too, and he I give him credit. He did his thing. They also had Kraft in this case here. He had 7 for 143 and 2 touchdowns. And then also too on the Pittsburgh side, it's like for the lack of the defensive pressure or lack thereof, and then the lack of discipline with some key costly penalties at times. A lot of things that turned things that might have been possible drives into ended up being 3 points. It was frustrating to see. Funny enough, on a side note, I thought Rodgers actually played okay, but he's moving around better than he did last year, actually. So I don't know what he's doing, but he does look a little more spry in that sense. But the Steelers, after letting the Bengals game slip by them and getting a lot of points put on them there, here we are again with the passing game especially getting just sliced up. But, everyone looks at the secondary, but they're not getting enough pressure on the quarterback as well, too. They kind of go hand in hand. And they're going to have to look into that. Green Bay, still I don't think have played their best games or their best football yet for the season, but they're winning and they're finding a way. And that's sometimes all you need to do till you can kind of get the ship steered in the right direction or the way you want it to be steered. So that's where we're at with Green Bay and Pittsburgh, but I think two teams that might be going different directions at this point. Game 2. This one, is kind of old school matchup from a Super Bowl standpoint, going back to the 70s, Denver and Dallas. In Denver, I used to call it Mile High. I don't think it's called that anymore. But Dallas, they started off, with a 3-0 lead, and then it went where after that. Denver picked up where they left off the week before, where they scored the 33 points. They kept going. Bo Nix had 4 touchdowns. Harvey scored three touchdowns himself. They were moving. Dobbins ran for 111. They kept it moving. I saw an interesting stat on a Dallas website. I think DallasCowboys.net. Don't quote me on it, but they had a stat where it said the Cowboys have not won in Denver since 1992. Now, when you think about it, that may not be that crazy to think, as they only play each other like every 3 or 4 years in each other's park essentially. So that's that one might be only a couple games. So it's not as crazy as it sounds. It does sound impressive when you hear the year, but when you start thinking about the schedule, maybe it might not be that big of a deal. On the Dallas side, CeeDee Lamb was back, doing his thing. He had 7 catches as well as Pickens. Dak only threw for a buck 88. You know, he had 2 picks, so that wasn't great. It was not one of his better games. Once again, he seemed to be under pressure and duress a lot, but that Denver defense is no joke. So that's not surprising for that sense. And I think Denver, as they move into having these big games with the Chiefs, we'll find out if they're for real or not when they have these 2 matchups against them. I still not sold on Bo Nix and that offense. I think the defense is real. The defense has been real for a minute. Ever since they got blown out with the 70 points or so from Miami, it's been a different defense ever since. So I think the defense is real. The offense is where there's a lot of question marks, and where things go from there. So that's what I see with the offense. I'm not really sure where that's going at the moment. But it's going to make for a fun last few months of the season, as just as we mentioned Pittsburgh before. Denver's kind of in that same category where they're going to be in there fighting for a wild card spot, possibly for the AFC West. I mean, they're right there at the moment, so we'll see. As I said before, it's them and the Chiefs, and we'll find out more in the coming weeks of where that goes. As I said about the Dallas side, I wrote off Dallas for a few weeks, for like week 3, I think it was, or week 4 with the Dolphins. The Dolphins have proved me to be correct on that front. I think Dallas right now is just treading water, and I think they are still in trouble. I said from the day one, the defense is not up to snuff, even though Dak has played well pretty much most of the season. That, I don't think he can only do so much to keep them afloat with that defense. That defense gets no pressure on anyone. And then the secondary is just pretty much torn up from the floor up at this point. So Dallas got to score 40 points pretty much every game for them to actually be competitive, to be honest with you. So we'll see where that lands when it comes to the Cowboys. Game number 3. On this final one here, we have Baltimore and Chicago. I picked this one because Baltimore is pretty much fighting for their lives. And also, too, we're not really sure. The Bears have a winning record coming into this game. We're not really sure if the Bears are for real yet. I think this was a game that would kind of give us a sense of how close they are to the top or not. And I think we got a good sense that they're not quite there just yet. On their side of things, I mean, Caleb had 285 yards, but he wasn't, right now it hasn't completely clicked yet with him and Ben Johnson just yet. I think it will. It's getting closer. Let's put it that way. I know a lot of people are pretty harsh on him, I guess maybe because the number 1 pick overall. So folks have a much more higher standard for him, and that's understandable. But I don't think Caleb's played that bad as much as some people have said, some pundits have thought of this year. But this wasn't one of his better games overall. But I think overall the Bears, the defense has been pretty good at taking away the ball this year, and and that's one thing that's kind of if they don't have that, you could put up some yardage, it looks like, on Chicago's defense. On the other side, it snaps a 4-game losing streak for the Ravens. So they catch a break there with Cincinnati and the Steelers losing. They're hanging around. And as for those 2 teams, man, there's a chance to kind of put Baltimore out of their misery. And now, with Lamar soon, we'll see if he comes back. I mean, with him, it's always interesting when it comes to Baltimore's PR and Harbaugh's comments on when and which game will Lamar come back when he is hurt. He's not hurt often these days, but like when it does happen, it always seems to be a bit of a soap opera. So we'll see. Maybe it's next week. Maybe it's a few weeks from now. Who's to say? But overall, they moved the ball pretty well. Derrick Henry had a couple. I believe he had a couple touchdowns. Yep. And now he lands his 5th all-time for rushing touchdowns. So King Henry making, his first ballot Hall of Fame career, making, solidifying it more and more each game. And he's had a bit of a rough season so far with some key fumbles that's essentially cost him 2 games perhaps. So that's a nice little moment for him, and what his kind of puts a stamp on how his career has been. I'm sure he'll keep climbing up the ladders. He still looks pretty fresh, even at this advanced stage of his career. So good on Henry and Derrick Henry on that. On the other side of it, Tyler Huntley, he had 17 and 22 for 186 yards. That's what you expect for a backup. And he kind of made sure he didn't do anything to kind of put them in jeopardy from putting them in any costly turnovers. So Baltimore's found their way, scratched their way back to potentially being back in the hunt for the division. As crazy as it may sound, even with a 4-game losing streak, they're still hanging around. So that's where I see, for the Bears, it's, it's a four. They're making headway, but they're not quite there yet. But you can definitely see the improvements in the discipline, and they had moments where they looked pretty good. And Caleb's a work in progress, I guess, that relationship him and Johnson. But Chicago's a fun team to watch. I do enjoy watching them, so I wanted to put them on the list this week. Some locker room takes. Not too many this week. The Eagles rolled. It's probably the most balanced attack for the season. When it comes to passing and rushing. There's some crazy talks out there saying, "Oh, you know what? They're better off without AJ Brown." Slow your roll, people. Slow your roll. Okay, that is not the case. AJ Brown's one of the maybe 10 best receivers in the league. That's not the case. I mentioned a few other things. I'll put it this way. The Saints Tampa Bay game, Tampa got a good win. You needed that to kind of, some of the licks they've taken recently. I'm not sure, even though I said earlier in the year, Tampa could be a Super Bowl contender. You got to beat some really good teams, and Tampa hasn't shown they could do that just yet. They seem to be like maybe one peg down, but they took care of business with the Saints. That Saints quarterback situation is a mess, man. It's a mess. It's a mess. Rattler, what's the kid's name? Hoff or whatever. Yeah, I even heard of him. Like, yeah, they need some work. They need some work here. I think they're going to be looking in the draft big time this year from a Saints perspective. But Tampa still keeping pace for the most part with the top teams like Detroit and Philly, Green Bay. But I think they feel it. They're one rung down right now. I kind of feel like they're in the same boat with the Rams. The Rams feel like they should be a big time player, but every time they play a big time game, usually they end up on the short end of the stick. But we'll see. Still got a lot of season left to go. We're not even at the halfway point yet, so we'll see what happens. Lots of football left to go. So I'll leave it there for now, guys. It was another great week in the NFL. I must admit, though, the afternoon slate was a little thin. NFL, I got to do a better job with that afternoon slate, man. It ain't easy, man. Some of those 4 o'clock games were pretty rough. But hopefully that's not the case for the rest of the season. So thanks again, guys, for checking me out. Once again, you can find me on all at Basketball Rewind weekly. We're getting into hoop season. I'm gonna have a hoop set. My first NBA discussion or episode coming up soon. So take a look out for that. But once again, you can find me on all those crazy platforms such as X, Blue Sky, Facebook, and of course right here on YouTube, where you can like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate the support. I thank you very much for the support. And once again, I'll check you all next week when it comes to some football talk and anything else around sports. Peace.